Well, we're back.
Yeah. Welcome to season 2.
Season 2. New location, same studio, Steele Podcast Nation.
That rhymes. I like that. I like that.
It's something like
Something along those lines.
new location, same great taste.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So check it out. Let us know in the comments what you think. Jenny and Alex, if you're watching from Korea, just leave a note saying, what you think about the new location.
If you're not from Korea, you can also
you
leave a message too. It's not just for 2 people.
Yeah. But, Jenny and Alex, if you're watching.
Called out.
Yeah, leave a comment.
Yeah.
But really, we just shifted a little bit. We're in the same room, so it still feels like home.
It is home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's good. So we did a series where we were kind of unpacking what it means to explore your faith and looking at kind of like the different arenas that you can use to explore your faith. So we went through that. What was that, like 8 episodes?
8 episodes, something like that.
So now we're kind of shifting into answering questions.
Yeah.
We would love to answer your questions. So if you have kind of questions about faith, about what it means to follow Jesus Christ, some of the confusing parts about that, like really, guys, anything you want, just send it in, and we'll try and tackle those issues, those questions. I think we've had one come in that we will tackle. It's on the board.
It's on the board, ready to go next couple weeks here.
Yeah, and so what Ryan and I have tried to do is we've tried to kind of think of some like frequently asked questions, or I guess what we're tackling this week is a question too, right? And it's one that we're seeing everywhere right now, and it's like the question is like, how do we respond to injustice?
I think that if you look around just today, anywhere in the world, you're going to see injustice easily right now. You don't have to go that far out of your own home in order for something to
not be
come
just.
up, something for not to be just.
Yeah,
I like that. I like that way of putting it out.
So for today, we've talked about an outline, but this is really such a big topic, and so we're gonna see where this goes.
We're gonna see where it goes. We have a little guidelines of what we want to talk about.
It might seem like meandrous.
It probably will turn into just a bunch of meandering, but
so we'll try and make something coherent out of this. But Ryan and I have been, and I mean ourselves, Ryan and I and ourselves, and we've been watching you guys respond to the injustice that we're seeing right now, and in large part, there's lots of injustice to unpack and cover, but in large part, we're seeing and witnessing racial injustice being exposed, and maybe it's that we're seeing it exposed again.
Yeah. And we're not here to go super in depth about what is currently happening today. I don't think that either Ben or myself are qualified to speak on that specific situation that's going on, just based off of who we are and the way that we ourselves grew up. But instead, we're going to kind of focus more so on the larger injustice as a whole that is in a number of different areas in today's society. And we want to approach that from a biblical view. We want to see what the Bible says about it, what the Bible's talking about, how to respond to it, and then what we as a Canadian, what we as people can do to respond to it.
Yeah, so, social media, media in general, just allows us to see injustice more, I think. We can see it in our own backyard. We can see it in the nation next to us. We can see it around the globe. So we have been watching this outcry for justice as a response to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmed Arbery. We've been watching this, and I, earlier I said again because we've seen this so many times, right? Like I just finished watching a documentary about the riots in LA in 1992,
right,
as response to like Rodney King, and they even juxtaposed that documentary with racial riots in Watts,
right,
and during that time, when you have Selma Bridge crossing and Rosa Parks bus riding, right? Like this, so this is not something that is new,
no,
right? I mean, we've even mentioned that we want to respond to this biblically, right? Well, when the Bible was written, there was an entire empire whose economic survival and impact was rooted and based in and founded upon and continued, flourished by racial, oppression. Really, anybody who wasn't, this of a citizen of this empire was, oppressed, right? So this is a cycle that has been long-standing, but I think when we look at the movement of Jesus and what Jesus did and what Jesus came to do, I think we have seen improvements in that too. And so it means, to me, that means when we respond to this in the way that Jesus would respond to this, that we can actually make like headway in bringing about justice from injustice.
Yeah. And the one thing that's but the fact that injustice happened back in a biblical time is the fact that the Bible speaks about it specifically. And from that, it helps us as Christians, helps we as people, I guess, to look at guidelines about how to respond in a Christian way. It's not like we just have to kind of guess and be like, well, maybe I'll do this, maybe I do that.
Yeah.
But there's a perspective on what God views injustice as and how we should be responding. And I don't think it's not just like one verse that is like in the middle of like some small lesser known passage. Like in our preparation for this, I was just looking through a bunch of just Christian responses to injustice verses just to kind of remind myself, look through it. And there was like dozens and dozens and dozens of different verses.
Yeah, and then there's the ones that you don't know. Like this is not just sort of like peppered throughout Scripture. It's like this is the theme throughout Scripture, right? And I think it's rooted in our fallen nature, right? Something's wrong. Something needs to be fixed, and we know that. We get upset when we see injustice, right? And that's we would call that kind of like like morality, like a moral code, right? And as Christians, we believe that is given to us from God, right? You look at as God created the world and things were right and things were going well, and then we get to Genesis 3 and it all falls apart because we sin. We sin against God, and now we're kind of like going about kind of trying to figure out what's right and wrong, but we still have this sense within us, this morality that gives this sense when something is unjust. Yeah. And we're outraged by that. Yeah. And yeah, like that is a theme throughout Scripture, is like fixing this like moral problem of injustice that is brought about by sin. That's the story of God.
It's the whole salvation story in a nutshell. So we've kind of we haven't went around the bush, but we've talked about how the Bible does discuss injustice. But I think that the best way to talk about it is to just flat out talk about what exactly the Bible is saying on injustice. And when I think about this perspective, the first thing my mind goes to is a verse in Micah 6. And I'm going to summarize it here because I don't have the Bible with me right now. But it basically talks about how God has shown us what is good. Oh, we have it right now. This is great. Give me to Micah 6:8. This is great.
I even bookmarked some stuff here.
See if I can remember it.
Yeah.
You find it while
Okay.
I'll see if I remember it. So
All right.
I think it's, I have shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God? Is that close? I remember this like a few years ago.
Yeah, that's, I mean,
Is it there?
like translations aside, that's
Right. That's
it,
there?
right? That's, yeah. So,
2 years ago. But basically what that's saying is it's this guideline of what God is requiring of us as people to do.
what do I require of you?
And he gives us three things that we're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
To act justly, to be just to the people that we are around, to,
Yeah.
and not just that, just to everybody.
Yeah, like it's interesting because it's like some translations say like do justice or act justly, but like same thing is like it's like you can't just like sit around and like oh man, like I see that and it bugs me.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of like this is like an action. This is something that you need to live out.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about like your faith being something that you it requires action of you. So we talked about kind of like service and stuff like that. But as you live out your faith, like personally,
Yeah.
you say it's going to manifest itself in the decisions that you make,
Right.
And you do. And so one of those decisions that you need to constantly be working towards is justice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that if you're watching this podcast and you're wanting to know about the Christian response to this, it's a chance that you yourself are already aiming to act justly. I don't think that, I don't want to go too much about that, but it's something that we should all be striving for. We want to be sure that in all that we do, we're doing it justly, whether that be in day-to-day interactions with people that you know, or if it's just you're acting justly to those in a broader context around you.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing it goes into is talking about loving mercy and showing that mercy to those who may not deserve it or who may not be getting that mercy from other people. There's a number of parables that Jesus talks about of showing mercy. There's a number of other Bible verses, but I think that's a giant aspect as well.
Yeah, and it's this it's this idea where you do what's right for somebody else, right? And at times that may even come at your expense. The parable, you talk about parables, the parable that comes to my mind is this parable of the servant, right? There's the servant can't pay back his master ends up forgiving him, right? And that's forgiving him of that debt that he was insurmountable, couldn't pay it back, and the master was just like, forget about it. I'm going to forgive this debt. And so that's mercy, but it came at the expense of the master too, right? Because he was owed that money in the context of the parable, right? And so it might mercy might cost you something.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Yeah. And the third thing he talks about is to walk humbly with your God. And I think that kind of has two pathways that talks about, one of which is just walking with Christ and growing with yourself, growing in your faith and walking through life with Christ, which I think is a huge portion in this as well. But I think it also is that humility, that humble demeanor. He's not asking that we're acting justly, we're loving mercy, and we're going to do that by rioting and tearing down whatever. But we're doing this in a humble way to bring about that mercy, to bring about that justice.
Yeah, and I think another aspect to walking humbly with God, it sets you up in a posture to learn what is right from God. Because if you are humble, it's not all about you. Yeah. Right? And really, it should be all about the Creator who put everything together, right? So when we have that humility, it sets us up in a posture to say, I don't have all the answers. Maybe the one who created everything and put this whole thing together might. Yeah. And I might just be able to learn something from him. And I say that loosely because you will. You will learn something from God when you set yourself up in a humble position. Say, like, I don't know it all, but God does. And I am going to be willing to change my perspective on things so that it lines up with the Creator of the universe, with God the Creator.
And I'm not here saying that the only verse about this is Micah 6:8, and you should do everything based off of just this
but,
one verse.
But it's funny because like we started talking about this, and like boom, like that was the verse you said it first. But my mind was there too.
Yeah.
So
it's the one verse I think it summarizes a bunch of other verses really well.
It does.
Like I think through other ones, like there's like Isaiah 1 that talks about a similar thing, how you need to learn what is to do right, and to do that you're seeking justice.
Yeah.
You think about, are you gonna find that exact one?
Yeah, I
cool.
got it right here. So, just before verse 17, it says, "Stop doing wrong, learn to do right." So there's that idea where like we're learning, and if you are humble, you are set up way better to learn.
Yeah.
And it says, "Seek justice, encourage the oppressed, defend the cause of the fatherless, and plead the case of the widow." So, as we move into like seeking justice, there's this. It tells us how to do that, right? And it's this idea of, if someone is oppressed, if you see like oppression is injustice, right? Yeah. If we see that, we need to encourage the oppressed. We need to be the voice of the oppressed, right? Yeah. That's actually, I'm going to move over to Proverbs in just a second here, because that it fits well with that. But defend the case of the fatherless. Plead the case of the widows, so like the orphans and the widows, right? Yeah. And oftentimes in biblical times, if you weren't with a man, just due to patriarchal societies, you were often destitute, like you were often oppressed, right? And so there is this like one of your chief concerns is or for people who are experiencing oppression, right? So we move over to Proverbs 31 verse 8, and it says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy." So here's the heart of God is this like speaking up and this defense of people who cannot.
I think that you hit it really well. When you read through the Bible, you often will come across verse talking about standing up for the poor, standing up for the widows, for the orphans. And I don't think that is specifically only for poor, for widows, for orphans. You hit the nail on the head. Like, this is for all who are oppressed, for all who may not have a voice to be able to speak. And the heart of God is exactly what you said is he wants us to be able to stand up for those who can't, to speak up for those who can't, and to be able to look out for those who are not being looked out for.
And that's going to change as society changes, right? We mentioned like in biblical times, oftentimes if you were without like a father, or if you were an orphan, if you didn't have a father or a mother, or perhaps in biblical times, orphan meant without a father as well, just because patriarch said, that's going to change. And in today's time, like the color of your skin might determine whether you get justice or not. And that's a sad reality that we need to work to change, right? And so the question is like, how do we do this like Jesus would do this, right? And so you had a verse.
And I think when it comes to how do we do this, the most important way I can think of is coming from a verse in 1 Corinthians. I think it's 1 Corinthians 16:14, which talks about in everything that you do it in love. Which is hard to say when you look at the current state of the world. When you look at the absolute just trash that is happening to the people that are being oppressed. This isn't just like, oh, I didn't get a cookie today and this is sad and I'm upset. This is people's lives.
Yeah.
People being oppressed. We're saying over and over again, but it's a huge deal. It's so hard to respond in love. It's so easy to just have an angry response. I know myself inside, I had this angry response to it.
I went for an angry run.
Yeah,
it's just like I just need to like get out and run, because just like the weight of like the lack of care and concern was my wife and I were talking about it, we were just like sad and angry about this, right? And when we look at do everything in love, right? Like, well, I mean, it's define love, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
it's not sex, right? Like love is a behavior that you act out towards people,
Yeah.
right? If you move just 3 chapters before chapter 16, so in 13, you know, Paul lays out this like definition of love, and it gets read at, you know, 1,000,003 weddings.
Every wedding.
But it's not just something that's enacted between a married couple, although that's sort of like a microcosm of like a relationship between people, right? It's something that's supposed to be acted towards like every interaction that you have. And when you look at that chapter, 1 Corinthians 13, you'll see this theme of this selflessness, that love is selfless. It doesn't boast. It's not proud of its own achievements. It seeks out the best of other people. And when we see people who are being marginalized, like just for the color of skin that they were born, or whether they're a girl or a woman or anything like that, in ways in which we oppress people today, you know, that is not seeking the best for them.
No.
And we need to seek the best as people, and that's how we live out in love. So you know, I think that there's some ways that we can take that and move forward practically. You know, more, and you know, like Facebook, and maybe not Facebook for you guys, sorry, I'm 36, but like I don't know how you do this on TikTok, but you know, Instagram, you know, it can be a way for you to help you formalize your thoughts, even though it is sort of like a bit of a feedback loop for you, just algorithmically. But there should be a need to go beyond that. You know, to transform that into practical results.
I think that it's important to know at the base of it that we should be acting in love, that we should be acting in self-sacrifice, as we're aiming to raise the voices of those who may not be able to speak in it. But I think that it goes beyond that. We need to get involved. We need people to have actions to this. And I think that a lot of times people don't know how to do that. People aren't sure what it looks like to get involved in social justice. And there's a few ways that you can do it. The first way that I would think about is finding what pre-existing social justice organizations exist.
There are a lot of great ones.
There are a lot of great ones, and they cover a vast majority of just different injustices that are happening. I think about, there's fair trade, which is huge.
So like a way to oppress people is to do that economically. And you know, so often even in this whole like racial injustice, like a lot of times like economics can be behind that, where, you know, I think in some ways it can expose our love for money more than our love for people, right? So fair trade.
Fair trade is one. I think about things that are happening here, but primarily overseas. Where I think about them, I think about like just human trafficking is a huge issue. Sex slavery, and it may be hard for myself as a person in Edmonton, Alberta, to be able to act physically on that, but I know one of my good friends is currently working in Laos, to help victims of human trafficking and sex trafficking, to help them create a business that they can feel a part of after this horrible event in their lives happening.
Thorn is another one that I came across in kind of like doing some like human trafficking research. So Thorn, it seeks to find out like internet predators, people who are putting out like inappropriate like sexual stuff on the internet.
Right.
So the Thorn is actually started by actor Ashton Kutcher.
Oh wow.
So there's another one. Did you mention International Justice Mission?
I didn't yet.
Okay.
No.
Yep.
Go for it.
Okay.
So you brought it up.
International Justice Mission. This is an organization that works through the legal systems of countries to make sure that people who are involved in human trafficking in sex slave industry are punished by the law, right? So they want to get these people. They work through these legal systems in places like Cambodia, Thailand, yeah, would be another one, big one where they work. But they're all over the place wherever there's kind of these injustices. Arising. Like they are a fantastic organization, and sometimes a lot of these cases, if they don't have like proper legal support within the legal system, then people just get away scot-free, right? And so they make sure they're doing that. So,
and these are just like 3 or 4 that we're listing right now. There are so many that are doing incredible works for people who are unable to speak for themselves, or are unable to stand up. And if this is something that you're passionate about, that you want to act on, there are so ways to support them financially. There are some even here in Edmonton that are looking for people to come and be a voice for those who can't.
So another thing that I think is important to understand is like what we can do as Canadians, right? It's so easy for us to like turn our gaze south and and kind of do this like, you guys got it all wrong, right? But in my own journey, in kind of I'm proud to be Canadian. I love the country that I live in, but Canada is not without its injustices too, right? And I think in large part that plays out towards our Indigenous communities, and I've also seen it play out towards our immigrant community as well. So I, as a white Canadian who is the recipient of the benefits of historical oppression, the white privilege that comes with, sometimes we don't see that oppression. It doesn't get shown to us. And so we have to endeavor to find out these dark histories and what has happened. So, in terms of Indigenous communities, I've been doing some learning and listening to Indigenous leaders, to those who have been residential school survivors, and just understanding like the history of oppression that has happened in Canada. And I think that when you kind of understand that, when you have that awareness, you can move to kind of act in justice, right? So what are some other things that we can do as Canadians?
Well, one thing that I think about is on the same idea of just raising awareness and knowing about what is happening. I think about the economic side of this, economic oppression that's happening here in Canada. And the first thought that I think of is the downtown east side, East Hastings Street in Vancouver.
Cool, famous
place. Canada's poorest area, postal code, I think is the proper term.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, whatever the term is.
Yeah.
I myself have been able to go there a couple years and just be able to just see it firsthand. The amount of just poverty and addiction and struggle that is happening on that street. Life is really difficult for those people on the street, and they're trying to get out, but just because of situation, circumstance, they're stuck there. And there's not enough people, I don't think, that are assisting, that are helping, that are raising awareness, that are talking about the issues that are happening here in Canada. So I think along the lines of what you were saying, just keep getting informed. Know what's happening. Know what is going on around you, and be able to see how injustice isn't just a somewhere else issue. It's something that happens here at home. Another thing that I think is just huge, I said it briefly and just didn't talk about it, is just this idea of raising awareness. Once you yourself know about what's going on, tell people.
Another thing that I think that we can do as Canadians, as we live in a democratic society, is petition our government, right? Our government officials represent us at the municipal level, at the provincial level, and at the federal level.
Right.
So they are actually supposed to be like representing our interests, right? And so you could sit there at your computer and your phone and make posts on Instagram and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, if we want to uproot systemic racism, systemic oppression, systemic injustice, is we need to work through this legal system. So something that I've been doing lately is like signing more petitions, so that politicians know that there's like numbers behind this movement. That's something that they should take interest in as they look at crafting laws. And I've even been writing letters to MPs and legislative assembly members, MLAs, and just so that they know that this is what their constituents are thinking, that these thoughts are out there, and that they need to take those thoughts seriously too. And I think that is a way that we can affect change. Get involved that way. Some of you aren't voting age. That's fine. You will be.
Yeah.
So start practicing that way to get political. I mean it, because that's some of the ways that we are going to affect change, is if we, put the pressure to the politicians who are supposed to be representing us. So I think that's an important thing, like an important way to get peacefully political, is to try and work through that system.
I think that's last thing I was going to bring up right next was in all of these ways that we're responding, in all these ways that we're getting involved, it's important that we're remembering once again that we're doing this in love. One more verse that I had was from 1 Peter 3, which is talking about how we need to be harmonious, be sympathetic, be brotherly, and it says kind-hearted and humble in spirit, not returning evil for evil or insult for insult. Yeah. But it's having this mindset that as we're acting, as we're working on making change, we're doing this through love.
Yeah, it was funny. Just a few verses up in that passage, Peter talks about compassion. Yeah. And Paul in Colossians, I think that's in 3 actually, Colossians 3, 1 Peter 3. Paul is reminding us to clothe ourselves in love, and a part of that in there is compassion, right? We need to hear the voices of the oppressed, right? And all of that compassion, all of that needs to be wrapped around in love. So be a voice, but not someone who is like out to just like argue, right? But be passionate about being a voice for the oppressed. Stand up. That's what Scripture. Be a voice. Speak up. Stand up. Is what we're called to do, right? I don't know if you guys have seen this out on YouTube, but Phil Vischer. He is the creator of VeggieTales, and maybe that's more of a my generation thing in the heyday. Maybe not so much your generation, but that Christian cartoon series was phenomenal. And so the creator of that, I think he's even the voice of Bob the Tomato. He kind of gives his take on this. You can probably YouTube it, like I don't know, Phil Vischer Injustice or something like that. Great take, but he ends his video and he says, care. I want you to care. And the video just cuts off. And so that's our encouragement to you guys too, is to care enough to speak up, to stand up, to write politicians, to support, to act out justice, and to continue to learn from God what it means to do justice, to continue, when we look at Exodus, right? We have the Israeli people being oppressed, and they cry out, and it says God heard them. And God hears the voice of the oppressed. If God can listen to the voice of the oppressed, we can listen to them too. And we can use those methods to enact justice, to do justice.
It's a matter of caring, it's a matter of listening, and it's a matter of loving. And that's kind of like the 3 words that we kind of want to leave you with for this podcast.
So thanks for making it this far, and I know it was a longer.
It was a heavy topic that we were going in.
And the fact that we managed to squeeze it into this is probably actually astounding. So you guys can congratulate us in the comments. Maybe just a simple way to go.
Just asking for all the compliments. Like we said, this is a little bit longer of a podcast, and that's because this series as a whole, where we're tackling some deeper subjects, some bigger questions people have. So just so you're aware, also for our schedules, we're going to do it a little bit different going forward. We're going to be transitioning to a once every 2 weeks schedule instead of once a week, just so we have some more time to really think about what we're talking about and be sure that we're giving you some good answers, some good thought out answers instead of just rushing through it. So we're going to be doing it every 2 weeks, still here on the YouTube channel. Continue to send in those questions so we can kind of know what else to be looking for. We have, I think, the next 6 podcasts kind of planned out. Know what we're going to talk about, but
we can
pick and choose,
tear that up, as you guys send in questions. So if there's something on your heart that you want to know, you want to understand, you want kind of unpacked, you want something to hear discussion on it, send it our way, and we'd love to chit chat about it. So, well, thanks for listening today, guys, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
See ya.